Okay, we've got the limbic system this time. This is probably going to be one of your favorites, and this is where you're going to really see the psychology come in. So, as we're looking at the screen, we see the limbic system, and again, we're looking at another three-dimensional view. So, here's the thalamus, and remember how the basal ganglia kind of wrapped around the thalamus? This kind of wraps around in more of a horizontal, somewhat way. So, here, if you put your finger like right by your ear and you were to go in about 1 inch into your head, then you would probably hit this hippocampus and this amygdala, which are the two main components that I'm talking about in this module. I do want you to know that when we talk about the limbic system, it's a set of structures. Remember how the basal ganglia was like the caudate nucleus, the putamen, the globus pallidus? Well, the limbic system incorporates many different clusters of cells in many different areas of the brain. So, for example, the hypothalamus is a lot of times considered part of the limbic system, but we also talk about the hypothalamus in and of itself. So, what the limbic system is for is it seems to be heavily involved in emotional behaviors, and that's why I said now we'll really get our psychology down. So, you have the cingulate gyrus up here. Here they don't have it labeled, but this would be the septum. You would have the nucleus accumbens would be in this area. See how the olfactory bulbs go straight into the amygdala and those pheromones, that chemistry, um, the fornix. Okay, but we're going to focus heavily on the amygdala and the hippocampus. So the amygdala is this, they always say it's an almond-shaped part of the brain, and then this is the hippocampus. And you see how they're sitting right on top of one another. So when one is active, the activity would definitely transverse to the other one, and so on and so forth. So let's see why this is such a fascinating part of the brain. So the amygdala, have you ever heard that there's a thin line between love and hate? Have you ever noticed that the person that you love the most seems to be able to trigger the most amount of rage a lot of times? Well, this could be because in the amygdala, remember how in the hippocampus that there were lots of different clusters of nuclei? One was for thirst, one was for hunger, one seemed to be involved in sexuality, one was involved in temperature regulation. Well, we find these clusters in the amygdala seem to be for emotions. Like you have clusters of cells that seem to be very heavily involved in the type of rage that you feel when you're really angry. Whereas when you're just being aggressive, like in a sport or something, usually that's the hypothalamus that's activating the sympathetic nervous system. Sorry. So, what about love? There seems to be nuclei inside of the amygdala for bonding, so that these two clusters of cells are so close together, we could see how one might lead to the other. And then I talk about in my classes that I think in order to feel romantic love, you may really have to have respect because respect involves a little bit of fear. If you know that you can walk all over someone and that you can get away with anything from them, like, oh, I'll always get my way, a lot of times we don't feel like the that feeling of love that we're looking for. I have so many people that come in my office and tell me their stories, and sometimes I say, you know what, I just want them to stand up to me one time. So again, the fear, this kind of slight fear of like, oh, I can't do everything that I want to do, might be leading to the love. So um, let's just talk about some of these things beyond this. So, what do we mean by love? Well, it seems to be more of a bonding thing, and then when you have these other areas activated simultaneously with the love nucleus, then we might get this perception of love. So, uh, um, let's talk about sex in relation to love because this seems to be a topic that a lot of students are exploring, and a lot of people want to know, the connection between sex and love and the brain. So, um, women's amygdala is set up a little bit differently than men's. Remember how we talked about that there were differences? And one area where we find is for like the oxytocin receptors. So, oxytocin is this chemical that seems to be involved in bonding, and it's also known as the trust hormone. And it's also released during times of stress as a way to facilitate the bonding, the trust, and also kind of a helpful hormone. So they call it the cuddle hormone sometimes. They have all kinds of names for oxytocin. But what happens is when a woman has a baby, she releases um, her uterine contractions are caused by massive releases of oxytocin. So when the baby comes out, she has a huge amount of oxytocin running through her body, and when she looks at the baby, she's most likely going to be bonded to the baby. So even though the baby comes out and maybe has all the blood on it and all the afterbirth and so on and so forth, and their head a lot of times is misshapen, she takes one look at the baby and she is like head over heels in love with that baby. Oh my gosh, it's the most beautiful baby I've ever seen. So this is kind of the love that comes from the oxytocin. So when they give you Pitocin, that is a synthetic form of oxytocin to stimulate the uterine contractions. But now let's talk about sex and men and women's amygdala. So, um, a lot of women might say, you know what, I'm going to go out and I want to have sex, but I'm not going to get attached. But when women are younger in their childbirthing ages, then their amygdala is set up to bond through this oxytocin. So if a man gives her a good orgasm, because an orgasm stimulates oxytocin release, then this oxytocin goes up to her brain and may bond her to him. So a lot of times my students will tell me, oh, sex changes everything. Well, I would guess that sex changes everything for the woman, because if a woman is younger in her childbirth years, then if he is able to give her a good sex and the oxytocin is being released, then this may make her bonded to him and make her a little bit more questioning, where are you going? What are you doing? This is serious now. Whereas men don't have a uterus, so they don't release the oxytocin through necessarily an orgasm, whereas women do. Men are more likely to be able to say, I can separate the sex and the feelings of bonding easier than women. Now, when women get past their birthing years, they may say the same thing, like, I just want sex. It's not about love, it's just I have my physical needs, and so on and so forth. But please don't think that men don't bond, because the research shows that men are likely to fall in love faster than women. They're likely to fall in love harder. They're likely to be hurt more deeply by a breakup. And women are more likely to initiate a breakup. Now, let's see maybe a reason in neuroscience why that might be. Is men have twice as many oxytocin receptors in this amygdala. So, but the oxytocin doesn't get released necessarily by the orgasm. The oxytocin for men, another thing that releases oxytocin is touch. So research has found that spending time and lots of contact stimulates a lot of oxytocin release, and in men. So men seem to bond more by spending time doing things together, physical touch, rather than the sex act. So a lot of men will say, oh, it was just exercise. It didn't mean anything to me. So I'm sharing this with you so that some of you are at a young age, or some of you are not at a young age, and you're still trying to figure out this whole sex thing. Is why does sex change everything? How powerful is sex? Uh, so on and so forth. So you should know that sex actually activates this amygdala. Just one more like little story here is to demonstrate kind of what I've been showing you, is a lot of you would know that if you put a male rat in with baby rats, they kill them or eat them. And but what they found is if you can leave the male rat in the cage a behind a glass window. So he's spending a lot of time with these babies. He's seeing them on a regular basis. That this actually physically alters his hormone levels. And within less than a week, you can lift the glass out and he will now start taking care of the babies. So the mother naturally takes care of the babies because of this oxytocin, whereas the father will eventually take care of the babies, but he has to spend time with them. And I think some of you who have had babies, you might relate to this. Like as soon as the baby comes out, the mother's like, oh my gosh, that beautiful baby, whereas the father might say, oh, can you clean that up first? And the father starts to really bond with the baby the more nights that he's up taking care of the baby by himself in the contact, whereas the mother might have this initial chemical contact. This also explains like why some people might give up they say that they're going to give up the baby for adoption, and then the moment that they see the baby, they can't. So let's look at that. So we learned that there's a thin line between love and hate because the rage is in there. Oh, let's tell you some stories about that. So back in 1969, there was this guy, and his name was Charles Whitman, and he was sitting in class, in a college class one day, and he felt this overwhelming rage to kill someone. I mean, just overwhelming. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go kill somebody. So then he went to go see the guidance counselor and told them about that. And she said, well, I think you should just take some time off from school. Seem to be stressed out. Let's just take a break. So he goes home and he kills his mother and he kills his girlfriend. And then he gets a hold of a gun. I can't remember the kind of gun. It was pretty intense gun. But anyway, somehow gets a hold of this gun and he climbs up on the Texas watchtower and he starts shooting people. So I believe that he injured quite a few. I should look it up, but I can't remember. But anyway, he had left a note saying, after you kill me, please examine my brain because I know something's wrong. So actually they did have to shoot him. They did have to get him down off of there because he was shooting people. He was causing mass chaos in the middle of a campus. And they did indeed examine his brain. And sure enough, there was evidence of an epileptic focus in his amygdala. Here's another story. There was this little girl, and she was 8 years old, and she was the sweetest little girl, but every now and then, every year and a half or so, she would just have this fit of rage. Like, just, you couldn't understand where in the world it came from. Just this massive fit, and she would go crazy, and then it would go away. And so they thought maybe she's allergic to something. We don't know, but it would just come so sporadically. But one day, I think she was 11 at this time. Maybe I started at 8, so maybe it's more like 9. So one day when she was 9, she was going to the movie theater and they were paying for their tickets. And out of the blue, out of nowhere, she grabbed a box cutter. This was back in where the tickets, where you could reach to the ticket attendants back in those days. More now, they're covered by glass. Somehow there was a box cutter right there, and she started stabbing the movie ticket seller. And her parents were just like, oh my goodness, this is too much. We don't know, because she couldn't explain it. Why did that happen? So they go in and they do a neurological examination, and sure enough, again, they find an epileptic focus, a cluster of cells that seems to be acting bizarrely, and in her amygdala. So what they did is they went in and they kind of took out those cells. And after that, she never had another fit of rage. So some of you might be saying, oh my gosh, is that why I get so mad? Well, have you heard of that show called Snapped? Well, with Snapped, what's going on is when your brain gets flooded with this emotion, this amygdala, when it starts becoming extremely activated, what it does is it shuts down your frontal lobe, which is your kind of control area of the brain. It's your socially acceptable area of the brain. So it shuts down the frontal lobe and it just goes into this whole survival mode. All logic goes out the door. And that's a great thing to learn. Because when somebody's amygdala is highly activated and you try to talk to them logically, you're wasting your time. You're wasting your time and your energy. So we call it emotional hijacking. So when you see, when in that show called Snapped, what happens is these people that have never committed major crimes before, they don't have this history, they just snap. And they just lose it and commit some kind of heinous crime or terrible act. And they detail the story on that show. Well, what happens is since this amygdala is for love, sometimes some people's amygdala can run really hot. And when they feel like someone's leaving them or they feel like someone's not being true to them, then their amygdala can run so hot and it can just drive them to do things that they would never ever do at other times. It's like a temporary insanity. And are we all capable of a temporary insanity? Yes, probably. Okay, so those are some kind of interesting things about the amygdala. Now let's see, I started this module and I said, oh, now we're going to learn about psychology. We're going to learn about all this. Let's see what we're talking about. So, did you remember how that amygdala, which is so fascinating, by the way, just one more thing about that amygdala, is this is where they believe your intuition is. Isn't it funny how males, those of you that are heterosexual males, if I put you at the Playboy mansion, and ladies, those of you that are heterosexual, I put you at some millionaire's balls, and then for those of you that are homosexual, I put you whichever place you would like to be. So anyway, everyone's surrounded by very attractive people that they could possibly date. Isn't it funny that if I put you in an area where everybody in the room is absolutely attractive, a 10 on a scale of 10, right? That even though everyone in the room is completely attractive, there will be one or two, one probably, that stands out above the rest, and you can't really explain why. So that's what we're going to kind of learn here. So this hippocampus has a major role in memory. Basically what it is the really old school days, which probably most of you don't remember at all, but they used to have card catalog. In the libraries, they had card catalogs. So all the books were in the library, and then you go to the card catalog and you would find where the book was. Now we use computers all the time. So it's kind of like the keyboard on your computer. So on your computer, all the information's in your hard drive, but what accesses the information in your hard drive is the keyboard. So this is like the hippocampus, is it's down kind of low, and all your information networks are up in your cortex, up in the upper portions of the brain. And so the way that you find where the information is through the hippocampus. So the amygdala is sitting right on top of the hippocampus, and those two are heavily intertwined. I think most of you already knew this, is that the memories that you have really well stored are very emotional memories. That's what you remember. And the more that I can make something emotional to you that you can relate emotionally, the more likely I'm going to be able to help facilitate you learning the information. So what does this have to do with psychology? This is the root of psychology. What I'm teaching you right now is the core of psychology. So a lot of you know that psychology believes that maybe your childhood, maybe your past, controls or has a big role in making you who you became. So let's do a couple of examples. So let's pretend that when your parents were upset at you, they would put you in your room and slam the door. You get in your room right now. Slam. So now you kind of forgot about that. That was when you were like 4 or something, or you did something really bad and they did that, and it was a really traumatic event. So now that you're older, your lover comes home and your lover slams the door. It was just because the wind had kind of knocked it, but your lover slams the door. All of a sudden, you take one look at your lover and you just feel a rage. You just feel so angry. All you can see is how insensitive they are, and you're starting to get so mad, and so on and so forth. And your lover is now saying, What is this? Why are you being like this? And you can't explain it. It was just like all these feelings came up of shame, of rage, of anger, everything just pouring out of you. Well, here it is. So, when a past event is recognized by the hippocampus, what it does is it sends a message to trigger the same emotional response. So, for example, when someone walks in and you immediately don't like them, that is probably because that person represented someone from your past that created negative experiences for you, or you have a negative association, but they have features of that person that has a negative association. So now you take one look at them and you say, I don't like them. And then that primes your reticular formation to only see the bad things that they do. So this is also about who we're attracted to and who we're in love with. So this is unconscious. This is down here. This up here is more conscious, and the amygdala is more unconscious. Like if you've ever experienced some of these events where you're sitting there and you can just feel someone staring at you from behind, and sure enough, you turn around and there is someone staring at you, and you say, how do you know? It's kind of this sense that we can't really put our finger down on, like this sense where you just kind of know, but you can't explain how you know. Or you're driving down the freeway and someone cuts over your lane and your hands automatically pull you into the other lane before you even consciously knew what was happening. It was like this third eye inside of you was watching you. So when we talk about the third eye, that would probably be the amygdala, this kind of intuitive sense. But here's the thing, should you trust your gut? The problem with this amygdala is that it's not based in reality. So let's go with who we're attracted to, and then we'll look at some fears and the things that we get angry at, so on and so forth. They're all in the amygdala, and this is your psychology. So the amygdala got developed by around the amygdala hippocampus. Those two kind of got developed like around the age of 4. So leading up to 4, the connections are kind of muddy. You might not remember them, you might not have conscious access to them, but they're there. So the first time that you felt love and bonding was with your parents. And so this is why psychologists say, oh, you will marry your father, you will marry your mother. So there has been evidence that if I ask you, hey, what movie actor would you like to date? And you tell me, if you had to pick from a celebrity, this is the celebrity that you like to date. Well, there's a good chance that that celebrity might look similar to what your parents looked like when you were a little baby. You'd be surprised. They might. Now, this is Los Angeles, so some of you say, no way, I like this race, and my parents aren't that race, and so on and so forth. But still, if we look at the features, even if it's a different race, if you look at the features, you might see some similarities. You might. You can just think about that. Now, also, this notion of what love is and what it means to be taken care of and what connecting with another human being is stored in this amygdala. So remember I did that where I said, okay, you heterosexual men, I'm going to take you to the Playboy Mansion. Let's just use that example to make everything simple. So all the women in there are absolutely beautiful, but there's going to be one that stands out apart. And this is what I'm going to guess. I'm going to guess that that woman has traits of either your mother or father, not physical traits, like emotional traits. Have you guys noticed that a lot of times we pick the same people over and over again? And it's just like we're almost like a magnet. We go straight for them. In psychology, probably a lot of you have heard this notion that, oh, if someone has an alcoholic father, then they're likely to be attracted to someone who's an alcoholic. And even though consciously they say, no way, I am never going to go with somebody that's an alcoholic, they don't even know when they first start dating them that they might have a tendency for alcoholism, or the person isn't an alcoholic yet, but that eventually they become an alcoholic. It's really interesting that this amygdala seems to be able to hone in on features from our past that we're not even aware of. So when you feel that rage, when you feel rage and you can't quite understand, gosh, why does this push my button so much? I would guess it comes from a childhood issue. And I think by understanding that, oh, the reason why I'm getting so angry right now is because of my childhood, not because of this person, then we can calm that amygdala a little bit. Looking at, by understanding how the brain is working and being able to step back and not be so into our emotions, but understanding that our emotions are coming from this hippocampus amygdala connection that might have been set up from a long time ago, that we don't have to just be slaves to our emotions. We can kind of just say, I feel this way, but I don't necessarily have to act on it. For example, if you know someone is not going to be good for you, how about stepping back and saying, yes, that would be fun, but I know in the long run it's going to cause me problems, so I think I'm just going to stay away. Or how about when someone's so angry, to recognize, okay, they're probably angry because of their childhood wounds, and I don't have to take this personally. I can just let them calm down. This is not really about me. This is about their childhood past and some needs that they didn't have met back then. So one last thing about this, and then we got to tell you some pretty cool stories about the hippocampus, is I think it's really important for us to know that this connection between the amygdala and hippocampus when we're relating to others, and to understand that when others get in relationships to us, we probably represent some part of their past, and they're actually looking to us for maybe a form of healing. And by recognizing that, like in intimate relationships, that the person that has chosen you and you've chosen that person, that actually we represent something from their past. And so seeing relationships as a form of healing instead of a form of getting something is a good way to look at things. Okay, so let's go on to this. I could go on for that amygdala all day, but I've probably gone way too long. You guys probably getting tired saying, woo, this one's too long. Let's just do one more thing about this hippocampus. So where we found out about this hippocampus, again, we're back to this kind of brain damage. So we talk about research methods, and a lot of the information that we got from neuroscience comes from brain damage. And so a really famous case study is this guy named H.M. And his actual name is Henry Molaison. And I only know that because he died a few years ago. And when he died, they dissected his brain for the whole world to see on a webcam down in University, San Diego. So what happened to him is he had that epilepsy. You know how I've been talking about the epilepsy in the amygdala? He had the epilepsy in the hippocampus. And it was extreme epilepsy. He was going to die. So they went in and lesioned his, HM's, they lesioned his because it was either we're going to try to fix this or he's going to die. But when they fixed it, I'm not sure what you're going to think about this. Remember, they were trying to save his life, but from that day forward, he could not get another memory into his brain. Now, he had the memories in his brain that from the past, but he couldn't put any new ones in because this is the keyboard. It is like they wiped out his keyboard. So he only had 30 seconds of memory. So every time that his assistant would come in with him, he would introduce himself over and over and over again. I saw a video of him in a grocery store, and they gave him the grocery list, and the first one was a loaf of bread. So he put him in the loaf of bread aisle, and he reads it, loaf of bread, and he goes and he grabs a loaf of bread. Then the next thing was eggs. So he puts the loaf of bread in the cart, and he starts walking his cart, and then all of a sudden the 30 seconds passes, he stops, he looks confused, then he looks back at the list, and he says, a loaf of bread. So then he goes and he gets another loaf of bread and throws it in the grocery cart. So then he notices that there's another loaf of bread there, but he starts to get confused. And then he stops and he sees a loaf of bread and he gets another loaf of bread. They say that every morning he would wake up and he would look outside and he would say the same thing. Oh my, the new model cars are out. So every day was brand new for him. He carried around the same crossword book puzzle for years and years and years. I think 20, 30 years, the same one. And he'd start and he'd figured out number one and then he'd put it in. And then he'd go to do number two. And he'd work on number two, but then he'd forget that he'd do number one, and he never got past like one or two on a crossword puzzle. So as he had this surgery very young, in his early 20s, I believe, and he lived till 70 something. And when he would look in the mirror as he got older and older, he would try to explain why his face seemed to be changing from his memory. And he would say, oh my, I think I didn't sleep well. And can you guys imagine this? He would ask, where's my mom? And they would say, she died. And he would be sad for about 30 seconds. And then he would be past it. Can you imagine how many times he heard his mom? So some of you are saying, well, oh, wow, was he depressed? No, he didn't seem depressed. He seemed to have generally good spirits most of the time, didn't seem depressed. He couldn't learn anything new, but he could get better at certain motor skills because they're down in the cerebellum. So there were certain motor skills that they could teach him, like writing, mirror writing, like trying to copy things in a mirror image. He was good at that. There was another thing called the Tower of Hanoi that he got better at. So in any case, I wanted to wrap up this with a silly little video, because it's always fun to add laughter to neuroscience, from Adam Sandler again. He must like the neuroscience because he's got a lot of it in there. So he and Drew Barrymore were in a movie called 50 First Dates, and the premise of this movie is that she got in a car accident, got hit on the head, and it damaged her hippocampus, so she lost her memory every 24 hours. Now that's not possible, but they actually did bring in a character to represent HM. His name is 10 Second Tom. So as a final wrap up to this, we'll take a look at 50 First Dates.